Okay, everybody, this is Joseph P. Farrell with news and views from the Nefarium for Thursday, May 1st, 2014. We're already in May, and I have some high octane speculation today to get right into, and that's what I want to do. This is an article that many of you sent me and noticed on Zero Hedge, and you sent it to me about the same time I found it as well, and it's concerning all those banker deaths. And I want to read this because it's really interesting. It gives the first plausible hypothesis for explaining why so many deaths in the banking industry connected with JP Morgan. Okay, this is a crucial point to have noticed here. But as we're going to see, there are maybe some problems with that analysis. We'll get to that after I go through this article. But it's a really good article. I hope everybody will check out the link and go read the article for yourselves. The headline says, suspicious deaths of bankers are now classified as trade secrets by federal regulator. And I want to read some paragraphs here because they constitute kind of the basis on which I'm speculating what might be going on. It starts out, quote, it doesn't get any more Orwellian than this. Wall Street mega banks crash the U.S. financial system in 2008. Hundreds of thousands of financial industry workers lose their jobs. Then, beginning late last year, a rash of suspicious deaths start to occur among current and former bank employees. Next, we learn that four of the Wall Street megabanks likely hold over 680 billion face amount of life insurance on their workers payable to the banks, not the families. We asked the federal regulator for details of this life insurance under a Freedom of Information Act request, and we're told the information constitutes trade secrets. There is one other major obstacle to brushing away these deaths as random occurrences. They are not happening at JP Morgan's closest peer bank, Citigroup. Both JP Morgan and Citigroup are global financial institutions with commercial banking and investment banking operations. Their employee counts are similar, 260,000 employees for JP Morgan versus 251,000 for Citigroup. Both JP Morgan and Citigroup also own massive amounts of bank-owned life insurance, or BOLI, a controversial practice that pays the corporation when a current or former employee dies. In the case of former employees, the banks conduct regular death sweeps of public records using former employees' social security numbers to learn if a former employee has died and then submits a request for payment of the death benefit to the insurance company. Wall Street on Parade carefully researched public death announcements over the past 12 months, which named the decedent as a current or former employee of Citigroup or its commercial banking unit, Citibank. We found no data suggesting Citigroup is experiencing the same rash of deaths as young men in their 30s as JP Morgan Chase. Nor did we discover any press reports of leaps from buildings among Citigroup's workers. Given the above set of facts, on March 21st of this year, we wrote to the Regulator of National Banks, the Office of the Comptroller of Currency, seeking the following information under the Freedom of Information Act. The number of deaths from 2008 through March 21st, 2014, on which JP Morgan Chase collected death benefits, the total amount of BOLI life insurance in force at JP Morgan, the total number of former and current employees of JP Morgan Chase who are insured under these policies, any peer studies showing the same data regarding or comparing JP Morgan Bank with Bank of America, Wells Fargo, and Citigroup. Now listen to how the Office of the Comptroller of Currency responded. The OCC responded politely by letter dated April 18th after calling a few days earlier to inform us that we would be getting nothing under the Sunshine Law report. On Wall Street, sunshine usually means dark curtain. The OCC letter advised that documents relevant to our request are being withheld on the basis that they are, quote, privileged or contain trade secrets or commercial or financial information furnished in confidence that relates to the business, personal, or financial affairs of any person or relate to a record contained in or related to an examination, unquote. Now, there it is. Since banks are persons, they are exempted from any disclosure. And you'll note that the banks are taking out on insurance policies on people that don't even know that they have an insurance policy on them, which potentially makes them a target. Okay, now back to the article here for a brief minute. Quote, the ironic reality is that documents do not pertain to the personal financial affairs of individuals who have a privacy right. Individuals are not going to receive the proceeds of this life insurance for the most part. In many cases, they do not know that multi-billion million dollar policies that pay on their death have been taken out by their employer or former employer. I'd say, interjecting here, that yeah, they have a right to know if a bank has taken out a life insurance policy on them. Absolutely. Equally important, JP Morgan is a publicly traded company whose shareholders have a right under securities laws to understand the quality of its earnings. Are those earnings coming from traditional banking and investment banking operations? Or is this ghoulish practice of profiting from the death of workers now a major contributor to profits on Wall Street? Now, the article goes on to list the amounts of BOLI or bank-owned life insurance policies by the four major banks. Bank of America has approximately 22.7 billion, Wells Fargo 18.7 billion, JP Morgan Chase about 17.9 billion, and Citigroup about 8.8 billion. Now, let's stop here and look at something else that this article mentions before I get into my wild high octane speculation for the day. The article ends by listing the 6 banker suicides. Now, please note this: not all the banker suicides that we're talking about are related or directly connected to JP Morgan. This is crucial because they're arguing that the preponderance of people that are connected to JP Morgan is here significant. And they list the following people: Joseph M. Ambrosio, who, listen carefully, worked as a financial analyst for J.P. Morgan Chase in Menlo Park. Jason Allen Salles, 34 years old, was an employee in the client technology service operating in something called L3 Operate Support, and was previously a financial exchange operator, Operate L2 Support at JP Morgan. He also worked as a client software technician at SunGard and a Unix systems analyst at Logix Communications. Gabriel Maggie, 39 years old, another JP Morgan employee, was employed in technical architecture oversight for planning, development, and operation of systems for fixed income securities and interest rate derivatives. Ryan Crane, 37 years old, an executive director involved in trading at JP Morgan's New York office. Dennis Lee, the Chinese gentleman that jumped in Hong Kong, had been, quote, an accounting major who worked in the finance department of the bank. We don't know much more about it than that. And then finally, Kenneth Belando, 28 years old, and they state that, quote, the young Belando had worked previously for JP Morgan Chase as an analyst and was the brother of JP Morgan employee John Belando, who was referenced in the Senate Permanent Subcommittee on Investigations report on how JP Morgan hid losses and lied to regulators in the London whale derivatives trading debacle that resulted in losses of at least $2.6 billion. All right, now, listening to that list, one thing stands out, and that is that each of the JP Morgan people were somehow in a department which had connections to computerized operations. That's very, very obvious. But you'll note that at least 2 of them were connected, moreover, and directly to derivatives trade. And I think that's really what is at stake here, not bank-owned life insurance. I think it's the derivatives that are at the heart of this mystery. I really, really do. And one of the things that makes me think that, indulging in my high octane speculation here, is that we've seen other people in the banking business that have died under extremely suspicious circumstances, or more recently have just outright been murdered in cold blood, and their families as well, members of their families as well. And then finally, we've seen recently the extension of this to a couple of French banks, the Banque Populaire and BNP Paribas. We've seen some banker deaths with French banks now. So in other words, it's not confined to JP Morgan. And even though I think this is a plausible explanation, the bank owned life insurance, the problem here is, as the authors of this article are pointing out, it is not spreading to other banks. Now, that raises the question then of why just JP Morgan? Why would this bank in particular be a problem? I'm going to go way back and suggest that it may be historically related to the connections that were sown after World War II between the post war surviving Axis elite and Western finance. And you recall, have offered the hypothesis in Babylon's Banksters that one of the purposes of the Bilderberg Group may have been to coordinate all of that Axis loot that now entered the Western financial system secretly. All right. And at the hub of that nexus, that network interfacing a hidden system of finance with a public one, you'll recall one bank in particular stood up, and that was JP Morgan. Now, obviously, I'm not suggesting that these gentlemen found something connecting bank operations to that historically. What I am suggesting is that they may have found evidence that the bank managers, the bank executives themselves may not even realize is there, but they may have found evidence of this intelligence agency penetration, the manipulation of markets, not by the bank, but by intelligence agency. In other words, I'm suggesting that all of these deaths may somehow relate to national security, that there was something that all of these bankers found disclosing the existence of that system and the degree of intelligence penetration into the financial sector. That may be what's at stake here. So I'm going way beyond life insurance policies. I realize that. I'm crawling way out onto the twig of speculation here. I think that life insurance is, at this juncture, kind of an interesting development, but I don't think it is a broadly based enough development to explain all of these deaths related to other banks, related in one case, the case of Mr. Richard Talley, not even directly to banking, but to mortgage title. And if you've been following the work of and interpretations of former Assistant Secretary of Housing and Urban Development, Catherine Austin Fitts, mortgage fraud was at the heart of her model of how the banking business was connected into the black budget, black operations, and so on and so forth. So I'm still thinking that there's something else in play here, but I'm going to reference this Zero Hedge article because it's well written, it's well considered, and it's giving a plausible hypothesis, a very different one from the model I've been using to interpret these banking deaths. Anyway, I thought you should know that. This is Joseph P. Farrell. That was news and views from the Nefarium for Friday, May 1st, 2014. We'll see you on the flip side, everybody. God bless.